Hello and welcome to our session on climbing the digital maturity ladder. I'm your host Gautam Srinivasan, and our talk today will be centered on navigating the digital transformation journey with an inside look at managing the ebbs and flows of business using the power of technology. Although digitalization is seen as key for enterprises to survive and thrive in a post-pandemic economy driven by omni-channel interactions, not everyone seems on board with the idea yet. Research from Gartner indicates that 53% of organizations surveyed remain untested in the face of digital challenges, which makes their digital transformation readiness uncertain. Now, many businesses still harbor apprehensions related to investing in new areas, especially technology, and for many leaders and digital makers, or rather decision makers, adapting to digital transformation can appear to be a daunting task. So where do they start, and how can they empower their organizations to be more employee and customer centric using technology to reach the next level of growth? Let's find out from an entrepreneur with over 2 decades of experience in digital transformation initiatives. Joining me in this conversation is Gaurav Kataria, Chief Digital and Information Officer at SAP Life Sciences, which is one of India's fastest growing pharma firms, working with innovative pharma and biotech companies to accelerate the discovery, development, and manufacture of complex small molecules. Gaurav, great to have you with us. From electronic lab notebooks to automating factories, we've seen how SAP Life Sciences has embraced its digital journey. So we're looking forward to some insights from you on mapping and managing this transformation. So let's start with the mapping part. Before embarking on a journey to attain digital maturity, how do technology leaders sell the digital transformation story, both to the board and the employee base? What are the best practices to build a consensus for an ambitious technology journey?
Hey, Gautam, absolute delight to be talking to you again. And, I think no better topic than this, right? The buzz of digital is all across. A lot of organizations, like you said, definitely want to embark on the digital journey. But what to do, where to get started is, the big question. Right? So when I talk to a lot of leaders and, internally within the organization as well, embarking on a digital journey is not a simple task. And it's not simple for a couple of reasons. One is that there is that fear of the unknown, of what you're really getting into, right? Because traditionally, as Indian enterprises, and actually even global enterprises, a lot of the enterprises are very risk averse. And, that's where the fear stems in. The second piece is, how much is it going to cost? And, what is the ROI going to be, is the second question. And I think the third question, which is catching up and becoming a boardroom topic all throughout, is that if I take everything digital, will I still be as secure as I am today, right? With the rise of cybersecurity. So all of these become, questions that we all need to answer. There is no one right way or wrong way to manage it. But typically what I've seen works best is that if you start at the leadership level and you work your way down. So if the executive leadership is, able, or the business unit heads are able to get into a room or -1, and then really start off with understanding what digital can really bring to the table, and then start understanding and identifying a few use cases, so to say, problem areas, right? And then do quick proof of concepts, and then take those back to the board is probably a better bet than rather than taking it to the board first, because the board will then ask you uncomfortable questions for which you don't have answers, right? So quick, rapid experimentation is the best way to buy, consensus at the board level and also at a team member level, because you have something to prove, right? I think the only catch is that some of this takes time. But if you work with startups and you work with your partners, I think maybe a 3-month journey to do a quick, rapid prototype, identify, solve a few problems, I think can be a good starting, and a stepping stone to building that consensus.
Absolutely. And it is also about the problems that everyone faces, right? You have to see where are the problem areas for a business and then approach the technology journey in terms of addressing those problem areas. And some companies, in fact, they keep an empty seat at the table when they're catching up for kind of understanding the digital transformation journey, which signifies the customer, and they try to see, what would happen if a customer had to go through this, and how can we make that journey easier for the customer? Fair point. Well, managing technology on the back end is one part, but the more challenging aspect is translating that data to insights and executing new plans, products, processes to grow. So in your opinion, what do you think are the biggest challenges when it comes to execution, and how do companies ensure that investments in technology are, in a sense, going in the right direction and not just following the hype?
Right. No, absolutely. I think, and I'll build on what I just said, right? Start small, right? Have a few quick wins on the table. But I think the bigger thing to do is take a step back, like I've, been a big proponent of, really see what your business process looks like. Look at where the bottlenecks are, and then start off with, like you mentioned, insights, right? Start off with the data collection part. Am I getting all the data that I need, keeping the end in mind on what insights that I really want to get out? Then move to the second step of translating some of this data into information, which could just be simple dashboards to say, what does the lay of the land look like? What data am I actually collecting? So that then I can really, cut out the noise and focus on the things which are really critical, so that I can get onto the insights. The reason why I'm sort of emphasizing this is because a lot of the times, a lot of organizations get lured with the fact that, we will implement machine learning and artificial intelligence, off the cuff. And then, they start with that, aspect in mind, or that, and just wanting magic to happen. And that unfortunately just doesn't happen, right? So that is the big issue. And so you have to start small, take a step-by-step approach. When you are doing that, look at what are those areas that we want to focus on. Because if you look at an organization, there could be, in our case, for example, right, at SAI, there are plant automation systems, there are laboratory information management systems that we're looking at. We're looking at the quality processes and systems. Then we are looking at the whole plethora of finance function, the HR function, the marketing function, right? It can be a really daunting task if I start picking all of these together. So I have to look at where my business priority lies, pick out one area, go deep into that area, prove success to a certain extent in that area, and then learn from that to create your own recipe, which can then be replicated, right? Some of those aspects will be training of employees, for example, and not only the tech staff, but also, say, talking about laboratory information that you're trying to look at. Then how do I really train the scientists to use a system better, but also give me inputs back onto that system to say, how can I improve it? What are the insights a scientist is looking at? What are the insights a lab head is looking at? What are the insights the business unit head is looking at, right? So you have to look at it from that perspective and then involve them in your discussions early on, and not really drive this as a technology project. It has to be driven as a business project where technology is an enabler.
But then the question comes in response to what you said earlier, the time is not on your side. Yep. And there it becomes a question where the marketplace is evolving at a rapid pace. Businesses sometimes face a decision whether to take an incremental approach or a transformational approach when it comes to digital adoption. So when creating the roadmap, how can organizations distinguish or find a balance between the two, and how do they measure the impact from a top line, bottom line, and ecosystem perspective?
Yeah, so I think that's a fair point, right? Because I think some bets are long-term in nature, and some are here and now, right? So if I have to see anything around technology, there is no fast fix. Unless until you're lucky to find maybe an organization or a tool which delivers exactly what you want. And I think with the software as a service offerings available, there are several of those available as well, right? So if you're looking at a marketing automation tool, for example, and that is your pain point where you really want to maximize your outreach and your conversion and your insights into customer outreach programs, then you can get a system up and running, which can work fairly well for you within 4 to 6 to 8 weeks time, right? which is a quick turnaround time. But if you're looking at revamping the way you run your business or your complete CRM system, then that's a daunting task. It depends on how complex your environment is. I was talking to a colleague of mine, happens to be in the pharma sector. They have offices in maybe 10, 12 countries, and they've grown through acquisitions. Their CRM systems are a heterogeneous mix of multiple acquisitions. And if they have to really streamline and bring everything into one CRM so that they, the management and the board really has a view on, their customers, their pipeline, customer connect, customer grievance, whatever the CRM will give them, it's about a 2-year journey.
All right. But I believe there is also a mitigating factor of the technology ecosystem having matured enough that it affords more enablement for the organizations. For example, there are a plethora of technologies such as, say, low code, no code, which are further augmenting digital transformation initiatives. So how do you think businesses should screen them and adopt them?
Yeah. So there are multiple technologies. Like I said, right? Software as a service, there's now platform as a service, there's always been infrastructure as a service, right? All of these low code, no code, like you're saying, right? Amazon recently came out and launched, like a 5G in a box. So if you really want to implement 5G in your organization, go click a few buttons. They'll send you the kit with the hardware, pre-configured software. It's pretty much they're trying to dumb it down to, like a plug and play. So those definitely exist. What you need to do is, once you've identified the business problem, bring in the right technologists on the table. Could be your own team, could be partners that you're working with, and then identify what you really want to do with 2 different objectives. One is doing an MVP, which is a minimal viable product, to really prove it out. And also, what will it take to really build a solution which is scalable, right? And sustainable, right? And sometimes both could be the same, because one means you just scale up on top of the MVP to get the scale that you need. But in some cases, it could be a crude prototype to prove that, yes, this is what I really want and this is what works. And then the scale up could be a different solution. But then start planning on those, and those can really help you accelerate, the testing and the implementation and getting the quick wins. But it depends on how large the organization is. For an SME sector, or for mid-tier companies, I think that could just be good enough. And that's where they're also getting a lot of edge today, because they're able to implement things faster. But as soon as you get into a large organization, multiple geography presence, 10,000 and above employees, the time to really transform the organization, make them move, is big. Also because there's a lot of change management required. There's also a lot of internal resistance to change, right? Because it's not a handset of people that you're wanting to manage. They're a big set of people, and you're fundamentally telling them to disrupt the way they've been running business so far.
All right. And that also brings into question diversification, right, Gaurav? Because if you expand into diverse verticals, there's that problem as well. So as companies try to expand their horizons, what is your advice for them to ensure a harmonious digital transformation across, say, different verticals of the business to enable better synergies?
So, so start with one business. Create your recipe, right? That really works for you, right? And then drive it from there into, replicate it into different businesses. I've also seen organizations who, what they do is, after they've actually created, so-called, the secret sauce for themselves, or, the golden batch equivalent used in the pharma industry, is once they've done that, then they actually carve out that organization, that digital organization, which is a combination of technologists and subject matter experts, as a separate entity or a horizontal, and hold them accountable like any other business, having its own P&L. So they start charging back to different business units, so that the business units have a stake, because they know that their bottom line is getting impacted when they're actually taking service from an internal function. That's absolutely fine. But then it brings about the whole seriousness to really help adopt technology and good things that have happened one vertical into another. Every vertical has its own nuances, right? And oil and gas will be a very different from a fintech, will be very, very different from a pharma. But that's where the domain knowledge and the subject matter expert come in, who can then translate the business requirements into the technology requirements and then make sure that whole process, is successfully done.
Right, but that process would also involve a lot of experimentation. So how can IT leaders ensure that their organizations have the agility to reset strategy to manage digital journeys which are in sync with the ebbs and flows of the broader business landscape then, Gaurav?
See, the strategy remains the same, right? The strategy doesn't change, right? What changes is the execution and the operational elements of that strategy. The tactics change on how do I really want to achieve the end goal, right? So it's not so much about realigning strategy. In some cases, yes. If you really, in your journey, you realize that, we're probably going down a rat hole or going in a different direction, or you find a very interesting pivotal point where you want to really pivot into a totally different direction, right? Amazon is a classic case, right? They built in such a big infrastructure to manage their own e-commerce business. And they realized that this infrastructure can be offered to other people, at a cost. So they pivoted their complete business model and made their own infrastructure available for a service. And that's how AWS came up. So there can be strategic pivots that could happen. But primarily, if you are embarking on a digital transformation journey, you're embarking on it with an end goal in mind. And that strategy, right, doesn't change. Obviously, the timelines can change, time horizons can change. Two other things can get added onto it because the competition's catching up. Right. But at the end of the day, fundamentally strong companies would go up, stay course, par for course, irrespective, not really worry about the competition because they know in the long term, if they're able to pull this off, it could mean, survival for them to a large extent or scale, whatever, growth.
All right, so let's distill all the points that we have discussed into one most important question, the formula. Now, there are several permutations and combinations when it comes to digital transformation and the result a company wants to achieve. So in your opinion, what should be done so that the perfect formula is found?
Very difficult. There is no silver bullet, Gautam, because, it is very difficult to arrive at that. I don't want to leave, the listeners with the thinking that there is a perfect formula. It is something that works for you. And that's where the initial rapid experimentation, having that initial risk appetite, be ready to, burn a few dollars at the end of the day, in this experimentation is really, really key. And I think where organizations also lose steam sometimes is because they just don't have enough patience. Like it's always said in the world of, entrepreneurism, that, you really don't know your success could be right around the corner and probably you give up too early, right? But obviously as businesses, you're far more mature, you know when to pull the plug. So you should have the ability to pull the plug if it's sort of not going in the direction that you want. And that's where maturity comes in. That's where bringing in the right partners on the table comes in. That's where the leadership from the technology perspective or the business perspective, that whole thing comes in, right? To know when to pull the plug. But, it's very easy to continue to go on, and it's very difficult to pull the plug, right? So knowing that fine balance is very, very fine, nuanced for every organization at the end of the day, right? But I think organizations are heading towards the right direction. Very difficult to find the right formula. But I think if I sort of say 2-3 things, right? One is you have to have the business problem identified. That's critical. You have to have what your end goal is. Look at data, information, and insights in that continuum, right? Look at upskilling your teams, not only the tech teams, but the business teams as well. Identify the right partners, right? I think some of those, work with the startup ecosystem. They're doing a phenomenal job. They'll be able to give you the fillip that you really need from a business perspective to really accelerate outcomes. So some of these things, I think if you're able to get them right, and last but not the least, most important is drive change management right from the beginning, right? Because at the end of the day, you could implement some fancy technology, but if the last mile user is never going to use it or adopt it and say that this doesn't work, it's going to be futile at the end of the day.
Is that one of the key highlights of change management today as we climb that digital maturity ladder? The fact that you yourself see yourself as an entrepreneur, the fact that technology enables everyone within the ecosystem to be, in a sense, an entrepreneur or a product manager, that they also have a role to play in terms of defining that customer centricity and customer journey, and also an employee journey as well.
Oh, absolutely. I think, being entrepreneurial, thinking on the feet, driving that change, understanding the pain point of the end, the end customer or the end user is really, really fundamental to designing any system, right? Use your principles of design thinking, right? It's typically said design thinking doesn't work for cases where there is a machine to machine collaboration. But wherever there is a human to machine collaboration, design thinking works well, or human to human, for example, right? The human element has to be there. And if we look around us, the impact that digital can create, like you said earlier as well, right? We've spoken about it in our previous conversations, is the bottom line impact, the top line, and then the societal impact or the human impact, right? So as soon as you bring the human in the picture, that's where those design thinking principles can be lifted, shifted, and really applied to define a digital journey or a customer journey, which really delivers impact and a great user experience also at the end of the day. And I think some of the banking organizations, some of the e-commerce organizations are really doing well because, they have that interface with the customer. They've cracked some of those, like you said, right? The golden recipe on how to really make it happen. But are we there? I think there's still a long way to do, to go for the rest of the organizations.
Absolutely. But the goal still remains to empower the people. On that note, we will conclude this conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today, Gaurav, and sharing your thoughts on climbing the digital maturity ladder for enterprises. And I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank SAP for partnering with us for this session and our viewers for tuning in. This is Gautam Srinivasan signing off. Have a good day.